I'm making sure we are online. Yeah, no, I don't see it on YouTube. I pressed live, but I don't see it on.
All right, let
I
me.
checked because I'm simultaneously on YouTube. I'm trying to. Yeah, right now we see. It's a little bit late, but hello,
All right,
hello,
how are you, Dipti? Go ahead.
hello everyone. Welcome to Microsoft Data and AI South Florida user group. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining from. Thank you so much for taking your valued time and to attend this presentation today. Today we have Olivier Van here to talk about deploy database projects with Azure DevOps. So if you did not sign up or if you did not subscribe to this channel, please go ahead and do subscribe and please post your questions as Olivier will go ahead and talk about the presentation. Please go ahead and post the questions on the chat window. I can grab all those questions for you and I'll see the right moment and ask Olivier about it. Welcome Olivier to Microsoft Data and AI South Florida user group. We are glad you are here. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi. First of all, thanks for having me, of course. My name is Olivier Van Steenlandt. I'm a BI team lead working for a company located in Belgium called X2O, where I'm mainly responsible for making the BI development planning, and I play around a bit with database projects and Azure DevOps as well. And I'm actually developing as well, more on the traditional side of data warehousing. That's more or less about me. I can't hear you,
Share
Deepti.
your screen
Dipti,
right
you're
now.
in mute.
Can you hear?
Now I should be able to hear you, yes.
Okay, I just told like you can go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, perfect. Sure.
And I will remove myself from the video.
Cool. All right. Maybe first things first. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we are.
Oh, you can. Okay. Perfect.
Yes.
Right. Okay, let's get started then. So, hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're joining from. In my case, good night already. Welcome to my session about database deployment automation using database projects and Azure DevOps. First of all, thanks for having me, and for the attendees, thanks for being here. Well, my name is Olivier Van Steenlandt. I'm a data warehousing and reporting team lead working for a company called X2O, which is a company located in Belgium with stores in Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. At X2O, I'm mainly known as a person who makes DBI development planning and the person who is trying to optimize the development and deployment flows as well. In my spare time, I'm a core member for DataMinds. For those who don't know DataMinds is the Belgian data user group focusing on the Microsoft data platform. Besides DataMinds, I do a bit of speaking and blogging as well, mainly about topics where I'm running into on my day-to-day job. So I'm always talking and writing about personal experience. Last year in September, I was happy to be awarded the Microsoft MVP Award as well. And in case you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to ask away in the chat window, where Deepti will be moderating today. If you have any questions later on today, tomorrow, next week, next month, doesn't really matter, just feel free to reach out. You can find my contact details at the bottom of my slide deck as well. So you can contact me via my personal website, datacuisine.com, via LinkedIn, via Twitter or X nowadays, or via Blue Sky. Just reach out. I'm more than eager to assist where possible. Today, I'm going to take you on a journey that I've been experiencing in the past couple of years. So first, I will set the scene and explain where I was, let's say, a couple of years ago, let's say 4 to 5 years ago, how we were working at that point in time and where we were struggling with. Then we will be moving forward. So I will start to explain how we can make our lives easier and transition our development team to work in a more flexible way and a more automated way today. And of course, if we're talking about database deployment automation, then, well, there will be some branching involved as well. Depending on our branching strategy, we will decide how to create our deployments or deployment pipelines in this case. For the people who already know me, well, I don't like talks of an hour without any kind of demo. So there will be a quite extensive demo today, since I want to get some smoke out of my laptop and out of Azure DevOps. Near the end of our presentation, we will come back to the slides for a brief summary of benefits and at least one challenge where I was running into as well. So first things first. So first, before we start, we need to explain where we are at the beginning and what the starting point for this presentation is. And as of today, we are working already in quite a structured way, and we're using database projects, we're using Azure DevOps. So as a matter of tools, we're already quite well established, but there are still things that can improve as well. So if we first take a look, well, so a couple of years ago, let's say 4 years ago, I was used to work with multiple environments, a development environment, if budget allowed me, a acceptance environment as well, and a production environment. Now, I was using the acceptance environment for deployment testing. I was using it to get business involved in an earlier stage than production, and so on. Then, well, we were already keeping track of all our changes by using Azure DevOps and Git, but we were still executing manual deployments. Of course, manual deployments, well, if it's to not that many environments, that doesn't take that much time. But in my case, for example, I was deploying multiple times a day or multiple times a week. So, and I was deploying to 9 different environments back then, since I was working for a group of companies where I had 9 environments in place, 3 development environments, 3 acceptance environments, and 3 production environments. So I was executing 9 deployments for every single change, which, well, still was taking quite some time. Then, as a matter of tools, as mentioned before, we are using database projects and Azure DevOps. Now, if we have a brief recap about Azure DevOps, then the first thing to notice is that Azure DevOps, you can actually work with Azure DevOps in a couple of different ways. If you want to, you can use Visual Studio with the SQL Server Data Tools extension, or you can use the flavor in Visual Studio Code, which is more lightweight, with the database project extension, or you can use Azure Data Studio with the database project extension. These are the 3 possibilities. What I typically do, and that's what I will be showing you today as well, is I just enjoy using Visual Studio with the SQL Server Data Tools extension, but you're, of course, free to choose whatever you would like to use. Important to know is there is a big distinction when you use Visual Studio compared with the other 2. Especially when we're going to talk about database deployment automation. The biggest change between, the 3 or between Visual Studio and the other 2 is that in Visual Studio, we have something which is called a solution file, which can be a grouping of multiple database projects. And that's something we don't have when working with Visual Studio Code or with Azure Data Studio. So we're going to handle this one during the demo later on. And I will be showing you and explaining you the differences. Then, we need to talk about the branching strategy as well. And as of now, for this example, we are using a feature branching strategy at this point in time. Meaning, well, we have our main branch or master branch, which is often called as well. And this branch always contains the production version of our code, always. Then I like to have a dedicated development branch as well, which always contains my development version of the code. And then for every single change I'm going to make, I will create a feature branch. And as you can see over here, I will be creating it based on my main or master branch. The reason why I'm doing this is because I want to maintain flexible. Well, especially when you're working in fast-moving environments, flexibility is quite important, and this makes sure that I can juggle around with priorities. as soon as we execute development in our feature branch, we're going to merge it to the development branch, execute validation. If validation is okay, we're going to create a pull request from our feature branch to get our change into the main branch and deploy it to production. That's how we work today. If we want to see this in practice, well, let's take a look at the following example. So we are going to create a new branch called feature branch data warehouse ticket number 1. And we're going to base it on the remote's origin master. Great, there we go. We currently are looking at feature branch. We're opening up one of our views, and we're going to add the product color. So p.product color, or color in this case. We're going to save our change, and Visual Studio or Git identifies our change. So we go to the Git changes pane. There we go. And now we're going to enter a meaningful commit message. Please make it meaningful. So ticket number and then the comment why we did the change. And please adjust the typo. There you go. Thank you. And commit all and push to the remote. At this point in time, our feature branch is available in Azure DevOps. Now we're going to check out the development branch. There we go. We're going to pull in all the changes. And we're going to merge our feature branch into the development branch. Right-click, merge into current branch, and we merge. And we push our merge commit to the remote. There we go. So it is finalized by now. This is how we currently execute development. Now, of course, let's go to the deployment stage. So we are checking out the development branch, origin development. There we go. We navigate to the Solution Explorer, right-click on our database project and say Publish. The build process is starting up. We choose the required target database and we hit the Publish button. And now we need to play the waiting game. This typically is the moment where I grab a coffee, grab a snack, have a talk with somebody, since this can take a while. Now, I know this will be taking for at least another 10 seconds, but this is typically what we do. So as you can already feel, we are losing some time, and okay, in this case, it was only 20 seconds to deploy to our developed environment. But what if you need to deploy to 9 different environments? Then this can take up some time, since you are merging your change, you're pushing it to the remote, and so on. So let's take a look at what we're going to do today. So we were already working with a decent setup, and let's try to get it a bit more, modern in this case. So the first thing we need to ask is, why do we want to bother about deployment automation? Why, really? I only have 2 environments or 3. Why do I want to bother about deployment automation? Well, first of all, I like to execute less manual work. That's the first thing I really want to do. So less manual work is something I really believe in, since I would be, saving time. Because, if I can gain some time by, just automate some things, I'm happy to do it. And then, even more important is, by using the database deployment automation, there will be less room for mistakes or for misconfiguration. I will say, we don't make mistakes or we don't misconfigure anything. Just because of that, I make my top 2 for today where I completely went wrong in the past. So if we take a look, mistakes, yes. One of the classics from my side, at least, was, I was required to report this to my manager a couple of times that I was deploying to the wrong database. Instead of deploying my changes to development, I was already deploying them to my production environment by accident. And yes, this happened quite a lot. The second mistake that I used to make quite often was, if we're deploying and we're only using a subsection of a database, then it can be pretty important, or even for a full database, it can be pretty important to change the advanced publish settings. For example, if you're maintaining indexes outside of your database project, it might be important to unmark the drop all indexes in the advanced publish settings. So this is something I used to forget as well, which of course led to happy moments at work where you were required, or where I was required, to recreate every single index again after deployment, which wasn't that fun. So just to avoid that, I want to automate the things. And then, of course, you can think, well, I understand where you're going through, but everything you mentioned can be solved by using a publishing profile. And you're absolutely right. So for those who don't know a publishing profile is some kind of XML file where you can store deployment properties into, for example, your target database or target connection, what you want to do with indexes as well. So yes, this can be solved by using publishing profile. But even then, if I can just automate the things, I don't need to take any manual action anymore. So that's where we are. That's why I bother to automate my database deployments. So how are we going to do this? Well, first of all, we're going to use Azure DevOps for this one, for today. Why? Well, I already have my repository in Azure DevOps repos. And because it's there, well, it was pretty convenient for me to use Azure DevOps pipelines, or to try to use Azure DevOps pipelines at least. But if you want to, you can use GitHub Actions, for example. In the past, before I was using Azure DevOps, I even used a Jenkins build server just to execute the deployments in that way, whatever you prefer. Now, if we talk about Azure DevOps pipelines, it is pretty important to learn the key concepts first. And so we are going to create pipelines, and that's a word that you're going to hear me say all the time today. So what is a pipeline? Before we get there, it is important to know how a pipeline can be triggered. A pipeline always needs to be triggered, actually. So a trigger can be, you saying manually, I want to deploy this pipeline, or I want to execute this pipeline. But it can also be time-based. It can be triggered based on perhaps when a change comes into a certain branch. That can be a trigger as well. And that's something that we are going to use, for example. Then a pipeline consists of multiple, or actually one or multiple stages. And a stage can be a logical grouping of different jobs and steps. So a stage can be, for example, build my database project based on a certain repository. And then the job can be, the build job. And in that job, we're going to create a couple of steps, since we will be required to create some steps. First of all, we need to check out our Azure DevOps repository. We need to use MS-build to create our deckpack file. We need to copy the deckpack file somewhere else to be able to store it as a published artifact. Don't worry if I'm going a bit too fast. We'll get there during the demo as well, where we were just going through the materials in practice as well. Now, what is important as well is, if we're taking a look at Azure DevOps pipelines, Azure DevOps pipelines actually is a CI/CD component within Azure DevOps, and this can come in two different flavors. We can use a graphical user interface, or we can use YAML. Now, for today, I will be showing you how to execute deployment automation by using YAML. And before we get into practice, we need to know what YAML is. So YAML, or whatever you would like to call it, actually is a set of instructions which allows us to create pipelines. And on top of that, which is a major benefit, of course, is that YAML allows us to manage pipelines as code. So we can actually create our pipelines as some sort of script and code and get it through every single branch as well. The downsides, the pitfall of YAML, in my case at least, is that YAML is indent specific or indent sensitive. Meaning, if you add one space too much, if you add one space too few, if you have the indent incorrectly, your file won't work. That is pretty important. Now, if we go more to the user interface for now. So if you sign in to Azure DevOps and you go to the pipeline section, then it is important to know that depending on your organizational settings, since, if you open up Azure DevOps, you first need to create an organization, and then you can create a project into Azure DevOps. And depending on your organizational settings or project settings, you will see either of these two views. The one on the left-hand side, which is this one on the left-hand side, is the classical view, which means the old view. The one on the right is the one that you will see by default if you create a brand new organization and pipeline right now. So they're moving, if we quickly compare, they're actually moving away from the distinction between pipelines and releases. That basically is the big difference between the two. So what is important as well, if we are going more specific to pipelines, is there is a distinction, or actually not really a distinction, but actually when you are, if you want to run a pipeline, every single job needs to be executed on a certain agent. This can be done on an on-premise agent, which is called a self-hosted agent, or a cloud agent, which is called a hosted agent, and provided by Azure DevOps and by Microsoft. Today, we're only going to use a hosted agent just for simplicity. But if you ever need to use a self-hosted agent, which is particularly useful if you want to deploy to an on-premise SQL Server, for example, then I got you covered. I've written a blog post how you can install an Azure DevOps agent in a couple of steps. So I will be sharing this one later on. Now, before we get into the details for database deployment automation, I want to get to the pricing as well. So there actually are two different pricing tiers. We have the free tier, which allows us to have one parallel job, which means, well, one pipeline can be executed at a time, and that for 1,800 minutes a month is included in the free tier. Important to know is if you're just getting started with Azure DevOps and you're creating a very first pipeline, you won't be able to execute it just yet. Why? The parallel jobs, or you need to be assigned to the free tier by Microsoft itself. It isn't very hard. It isn't a hard process, but you will be required to fill in a Microsoft Forms, which will be sent to one of the support teams, and they will be enabling the free tier for you. The time varies between a couple of hours and a couple of days. As soon as they assign you the free tier, you're good to go. To be fair, I'm using the free tier already for a couple of years, and I never went over the 1,800 minutes a month, and I'm deploying at least to 10 different databases multiple times a week. So I'm still fine with the free tier. Of course, if you really want to do things simultaneously, you can choose for the paid tier as well, which allows you to, well, have more than one parallel job. And then, of course, depending if you need a hosted agent or a self-hosted agent, the prices vary a little bit. And the big benefit is, well, you have unlimited minutes if the minutes were restricting you from deploying. Be aware the pricing that I'm showing you is based on the pricing as it was in December 2023. Now, enough about pricing. Let's dive into what we need to know to get our database deployed in Azure DevOps. Well, we are going to make use of a certain thing called DataAISF, which is an API library which is responsible for database development and deployment automation. Now, we're not going to that library directly, but we're going to use SQL package. SQL package is a command line interface for DataAISF, which is particularly created to work with DACPACs and backpacks. The upside of this is, well, this is available for SQL Server, for Azure SQL, for Azure SQL Managed Instance, for Azure Synapse Analytics, for Microsoft Fabric. So what you're learning today can be used for other things as well than deployment to Azure SQL, which will be what I will be showing you today. So that's that. Now, to use SQL package, it is actually fairly straightforward in pipelines. If we first take a look at Azure SQL, well, in our pipelines, we can use a component which is called the Azure SQL Database Deployment Task, which is a built-in task into Azure pipelines. That's what we can use. And we have actually the other one for SQL Server, which is also a built-in task. We can use these ones if we want to. If you like to get to do some coding, you can use command line as an alternative as well. Feel free to. But the easiest way for me personally is by using the built-in tasks. Now, before we get more practical, we need to talk about branching as well. This isn't the favorite topic for a lot of us, but branching is important since, well, depending on our branching strategies, our pipelines will be created differently. To give you an example, so back to the feature branching strategy, which I'm using, where I already mentioned what I do with each branch. What I actually want to achieve is, well, as soon as I get a change into my development branch, as you can see right here, I want to trigger my pipeline to build my database project and deploy it to my development environment. And every single time that a merge to my development branch happens, I actually want to execute that. Then, of course, something similar for my main or master branch. Well, as soon as I create a pull request and accept and complete the pull request, I want a build and deployment happening automatically in this case. That's what I want to achieve today with the deployment automation. Now, this is for feature branching. This is what I'm currently using in my production environment. I know there is another branching strategy which is probably even more popular, which is trunk-based branching. The key concepts here as well are on your remote, you will only have one branch, your main or master branch. And what it is going to do is this will be your only branch you have in Azure DevOps. And for every feature everyone wants to develop, they're creating a branch based on the main branch on the local machine. And if we just zoom in into one of these bullet points, we can actually see the following. So as soon as we create a pull request and it gets approved and completed, we want to get the build process executed. As soon as that is done, we want to deploy to our development environment. Then we will have a full stop, as you can see right here. As soon as somebody approves, we're going to deploy to the acceptance environment. Then a full stop again, and then we want to deploy to our production environment in the end. That's what we want to achieve here. The reason why I'm not using this strategy in my case, of course, if it works for you, that's perfectly fine, you can. The reason why I don't is because in this way, if priority changes and my pull request gets accepted first, well, it's going through the full pipeline, and as long as it didn't reach production, everything else is going to queue. That's what's going to happen. That's the reason why I'm using the feature branching strategy. Now, a bit more about the validation step. As mentioned, between environments, before I want to deploy to my acceptance environment, I want some validation to happen on my development environment. So what I do is I deploy to my development environment straight away, and then I'm sending out a notification to somebody to validate my changes. This can be done manually on the development environment. If they're fine, they're going to approve the validation, and then it can continue to deploy to the next environment. And that's something which is particularly useful if you want to use the trunk-based branching strategy. Why? Well, somebody needs to explicitly agree to deploy to the next environment. That's the reason why. Now, if we are comparing branching strategies, then this is a very brief summary, of course, based on my experiences. I tried both, and in my experience at least, I like feature branching a bit more just because it allows me to be a bit more flexible. Why? I can easily juggle around with priorities. If something changes on a business priority, I can easily, put that work aside, create a new branch based on my main branch, and continue my work. Very easy. And I don't mess around with my code at that point in time. And this is fairly useful very useful actually, for big changes. If you're working really on projects, then it is pretty useful to use the feature branching strategy. Now, that doesn't mean the trunk-based branching strategy is not useful or cannot be useful. If you're working with smaller changes, then it might be more useful to use this kind of branching strategy, that it easily can go from environment to environment, especially if you're deploying multiple times a day, a week, then this can be really useful as well. But more for smaller changes because it uses, as shown as well, the FIFO principle. So every change needs to go through the full pipeline before the next one can get in. That basically is the reason why. Now, I've been talking for a bit more actually than 20 minutes. Okay, cool. I'm just going to ask, are there currently any questions?
We do not have any questions, Olivier.
Okay, cool. Then I'm just going to continue.
Continue. Yeah.
So people, if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to ask away in the chat window. More than eager to answer them if possible. So it is demo time. Let's try to get some smoke out of Azure DevOps or out of my laptop. Might be the case as well. So what are we going to do?
Hi, Olivier.
Yes.
Real quick. Sorry if I interrupt. Real quick before you get started. So, folks, I also shared in the live chat for you to have an opportunity to enter into a raffle with a chance to win the book Deciphering Data Architecture by James Serra. So check out the comments, the live chat here. We'll be closing that in just 5 minutes before 7. So it's your chance here to get to enter for a chance to win a book. And in addition to what Olivier mentioned, remember, enter your questions using the live chat. Thank you. How are you, Olivier?
If I was allowed, I would be entering the competition myself, but I'm afraid I'm not so. So let's continue. So what are we going to do? I have opened Azure DevOps. I'm already a bit too eager, but first things first, I'm currently signed into Azure DevOps, and I've created my organization, which is basically my name for today. And I created, well, 2 projects. I'm only going to use one. And if everything goes terribly wrong, I have my backup as well, of course. So my deployment automation project is the one I'm going to use. And what is included? Well, I do have my repository in here, which is a fairly easy one for today. But we are going to focus on the pipeline section for today, which is this one. And as you can see, I still have the classic view enabled since I have releases, which won't be there anymore if you use the new setup. And we're going to focus on pipelines. So pipelines. And as a first example, we are going to create our build pipeline. So for today, we first are going to create a separate build and release pipeline. And later on, we're going through an example as well, which I like to call one to rule them all. Yes, I am a Lord of the Rings fan, which is going to handle every single thing that we were mentioning for the trunk-based branching strategy as well. So first things first, we're going to navigate to the right-hand side of the screen to a new pipeline. There we go. And then we need to define where we want to start from. So in my case, I'm going to start from an Azure repo. There we go. And before I get here, actually, something I always forget, if you still want to use the classic editor or a user interface, then you can still use the classic editor over here. Just know if you do, you won't be able to manage your pipeline as code. That's the downside. But as mentioned, Azure repos Git. I'm going to select my AdventureWorks LT repository. And then I'm going to start from a starter pipeline. That's the most easy one with not too many fancy things around. So starter pipeline. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give my YAML file a name. As you can see here, it would be called Azure Pipelines.yaml. I'm going to change this to CI, and I'm quickly going to take a peek. There we go. CI demo build. That's how I'm going to call it today. There we go. And then the first thing we want, or we are allowed to do, is just get rid of all these lines starting from the steps. We don't need that for today. And now we can start to build our pipeline. So first of all, we are going to identify the trigger. So when do we want to have the pipeline to be triggered? In my case, I don't want to have master, but development. And to get that done, I'm going to use some additional syntax, which will be branches and then use an include, and then define my branch, which will be development. That's what I'm using. So this pipeline only needs to be triggered when something happens on my development branch. Then the next thing we need to define, and I'm going to zoom in a bit since it might be a bit too small, there we go, is we need to define a pool, the agent, the hosted agent that we're going to use. For today, I'm going to use a hosted agent, which I want to have a certain VM image, and in my case, the Windows VM or the Windows latest version should be on there. That's what I want to use. Oh, no demands. Go, enter, thank you. And now we're ready to go to define our job. Since we're creating a job with only one stage, we're not required to define the stage. You can, and that probably would be best practice. For today, I'm not going to. So jobs, that's what we're starting with, enter. And then make sure that the indents are right. We need to say, well, job, and give it the name. In my case, I'm going to say build process. And then I'm going to continue by saying, you know what, I want to give it a decent name as well to show to the people who are looking at the deployment pipelines. I'm going to say, well, this job is going to build my database projects. Build database projects, doesn't really matter. That's what I'm doing. As a next thing to do is we're going to add or define some steps. There we go, steps. And now I'm going to stop coding actually, since, well, yes, it is a code file, but we have something very useful in Azure DevOps pipelines, which is called an assistant. And this is useful. This is allowing me to still use some kind of graphical user interface to create the code that I require. So show assistant. And the first thing we need to do is we need to use the MS build task to build our database project. So we're searching for MS build. There we go. And then we get here. So we need to define the project. And this is something I was mentioning earlier as well. If you're working with Visual Studio, then you can use this code. You can use the solution file to build all your database projects. If you're using Visual Studio Code or Azure Data Studio, then you can't use this. So just to make sure our pipelines are future-proof, for example, we can say, well, you know what, just search for the SQL project files. This is a great way to go, actually. So we're looking for SQL project files. We can use the current version of, or the latest version of MS Build. That's all fine. And furthermore, we don't need to bother too much about the settings, and we're just going to add it. There we go. Now, just to show you, it showed up under the or below the steps section. And just to show you how important the indents are, I'm just going to add one space at the task. As you can see, it just says, I don't want anymore. So just to show you that indents are really important for this one. So right now it's solved again. Now, as a next step, we want to copy the result of the MS build task to a separate directory, just for clarity, actually. So for that, we use a copy files task. There we go. And we need to define the folder. And this is something I could never guess if I wanted to. But if you go over the information icon, you can actually see the build directory right here, or the variable in which the build directory will be defined. And if we use that one over there, that should be okay. And then we're going to define, you know what, in that build directory, just look for every single content which is using a .backpack extension. It's just like this. And to finalize, we're going to define a target folder. Just the same drill, use the information button, build artifact staging directory. Cool, that's it. And we add the task. Cool. Now, as soon as this task gets executed, it will copy the backpack files that it can find to a separate target folder. And as a final step in our build pipeline, we want to publish that result as a pipeline artifact. So if we search for pipeline artifact, there we go, last one, We just need to define, well, where to search, which is the artifact staging directory, which we configured in the previous step. And then we need to give our artifact a name. This can be anything you want. For today, I will be just calling it dev drop. It doesn't really matter how we call it. You just need the name later on in the deployment pipeline as well. And we're going to publish it to Azure Pipeline. That's okay. And then we are going to add the step. And there we go. Now we can close off the assistant, and we're good to go. We created our very first YAML pipeline. So I am going to save and run. Commit meshes, that's fine. Just be aware, for today, for simplicity, I'm not going to create it as a separate branch. I'm just going to do it straight away into MOS. I know that this is the best practice, but I'm just going to, for simplicity, and to save a little bit of time as well. So save and run. It's creating the pipeline right now in Azure DevOps. It will give it a terrible name, as you will see. So I'm going back to the pipeline section, to all. And as you can see, there is a pipeline running, but hey, it has a strange name. By default, it provides the name. If you don't specify it in the YAML file, it will provide the name of your repository for some reason. So I'm just going to rename it for clarity, for myself, of course, CI demo, and let's say build. There we go, save. There we go. Now it got a decent name. And the pipeline is running. And as you can see, it's running on its very first stage. And if we go into details, it's already, what can we see? Well, it's already running for quite some seconds. It didn't provide me any artifact yet. And let's take a look what it is currently doing. So if we go to the job section right here, you can actually click on the job that it is executing. So build a database project. So if we take a look, oh, it's already there. Great. So it initialized the job, and hey, it checked out my branch. We didn't specify that. Well, that was done because we pointed out that we want to start from Azure repos. So then it's just doing it automatically. And then it just executes every step we have defined in our pipeline. So it used MS-Build to build the project, created certain files. Most important for us was the TechPack file over here. There we go. It copied the file to a separate location, and it published the pipeline artifact with the name devdrop. To validate this, we can just go to the overview, and if we go to the related section, we can say, well, one published, and we can click on it. And right now we get to the published artifacts section, where we can just go through my devdrop artifact, where we will be able to see it actually, well, only published my AdventureWorks LT backpack file. This is the build pipeline. Now, well, we want to deploy, so let's take a look at the deployment pipeline. What are we going to do? Well, we're going back to pipelines, and we're going to create a new pipeline. And for this one, we are going to start off from Azure Repos Git again. It actually doesn't really make sense since we don't use it anymore or need it anymore. AdventureWorks LT, and we're going to start off from a starter pipeline again. First of all, give it a decent name, CD demo deploy, for example, whatever you would like to call it. And then we can start over the same drill. So everything starting from steps can be removed. Then we're going to define the trigger. And let's say, well, trigger, we're going to use a certain branch. Oh, this is happening. Yeah, okay, branches. And then I want to say include. And then we would like to say, you know what, I want development. Now, in addition to this, we're going to add resources as well. Why? Well, we want to add we want to use the result of our previous pipeline to deploy that result. So what do? We're going to add resources. Oh, then we're going to add a certain pipeline. So pipeline, and then, well, CI demo build. And then we need to find the source as well by doing this source CI demo build. That's what we need to do. Now it knows, well, I want to use the resource from the other pipeline. Then, same drill over again. I'm going to zoom in slightly. There we go. We need to define the VM image, and I want to use Windows latest again. And now we are ready to define our job again. So this is what we learned already. So jobs, enter, yeah, that's cool. There we go. So we're defining a job. I probably need to add space right there. And what is this job name? Well, publish Azure SQL, for example. Now we give it another display name, there we go. You know what? Publish to Azure SQL development. And I need to learn how to type during a demo, but that just as a side note. There we go. So display name, publish to Azure SQL development. Now, to be able to publish, we need to add a couple of steps, and this is nothing new. But right now, this line that we're going to use right now will be new. So as mentioned before, we needed to provide the repository where we want to start from. And as you saw in the build pipeline, it said, well, as a first step, I'm going to check it out. This takes a couple of seconds. It can take a couple of minutes as well if it's a really large repository. We want to avoid that. Because of that, we're going to use a certain hint, which is called checkout none. This is making sure that the checkout step will be skipped during the execution of this pipeline. And since we don't need it anymore for this pipeline specifically, that's perfectly fine. So checkout none. And now we can just, well, start over with the Azure DevOps assistant again. So show assistant. What are we going to do first? Well, we're going to download our pipeline artifact. There we go. From the current run, no, a specific run. Oh, from what? Okay, deployment automation project. We need to define which build pipeline. In my case, my CI demo build. And then, yeah, you know what? When appropriate, download the artifacts from the triggering build. That's fine. Build version latest, that's perfectly fine. And that basically is the most important setting. So right here, artifact name, we need to define the artifact name devdrop in my case. And then we can define the matching patterns. You are not required to, but I'm just going to get it in there and say, well, I only want to have my backpack files. But basically are the only files that are in there. So, but I just define it to be sure. And the pipeline workspace for this one is fine. And we're going to add the task. So as you can see, we generated some YAML code, getting to the right indent. And now the only thing that remains is, well, we need to publish this result to our database. So you know what? Azure SQL database deployment, it's this one. We need to define which subscription we want to use to access it. There we go, basic subscription. And then we need to provide all the credentials for authentication. For today, I'm going to use SQL Server authentication. Just know there are much safer options around, especially service principal and so on. But for today, for simplicity, I'm just going to use SQL Server authentication. Now, I'm not going to hard code everything in this screen, and I'm just going to use variables. So if we go to the variables section on the top right corner, variables, new variable, I first want to create one for my server name, which will be byte size data.database.windows.net. Okay. Going to create one for my var database name, which will be Adventure Works LT Development. One for my username. There we go, which is my name for today since I'm on my demo environment. And then, oh no, I'm going to define my password as well. Don't worry, I'm going to keep this value a secret to make sure you can't read it. There we go. And we're done with configuration for our variables. Now, As a next step, we're going to use these variables in that one component or in that one task by saying, well, Azure SQL Server is using this variable. I can navigate back to the variables screen back and forth to get everything else. So let me quickly do it for the database name, for my username or login, actually. There we go. And the same for password. There we go. Cool. Everything is set up. Now we need to define what we want to deploy. In our case today, we're deploying a SQL DACPack file by using the publish action of the SQL package interface we're using. Then we need to define where this DACPack file is. So what we're just going to say is, well, you know what, search in all the folders for a file called adventure works. I'm going to remove my mouse, lt.DACPack. If you want to use a publishing profile, and I actually didn't show this one earlier, but if you want to use a published profile, you will need to have it in the copy task as well. That's pretty important. Otherwise, you won't be able to use it. But if you want to, you can define it right here as well. I'm not going to for today, just for the ease of simplicity, and I'm not going to provide any additional SQL package arguments. As a next step, the only thing I need to do is I need to click Add to add this task to my pipeline as well. So we added the task, and we are good to go, actually. So as I just quickly take a look, everything seems to be quite okay to me. We have our checkout none, we created download pipeline artifact task, and the SQL Azure DACPack deployment task. Well, you know what? It is time to save our pipeline. Again, in the master branch, I'm sorry for not following best practices today, but just due to a time constraint I have. So, as before, it named it properly as my repository name, and we're quickly going to rename it to give it a meaningful name. Well, meaningful. CD demo deploy. That's what we're going to call it today. Save. I'm not going to execute it yet. What I'm going to do is, since I want to show you what it does, I'm going to switch over to my database project in Visual Studio. And I'm first going to check out my master branch. There we go. I'm going to pull in all the changes. And if everything goes fine after, there we go, cool. If everything goes fine, my YAML files are already included by now. I can show you as well, actually. And I will just do, there we go. I had it on a separate screen where you can see, well, the demo build and demo deploy pipeline are included in my master branch already. So just make sure that it is up to date. Now, what do you want to do? We're going to execute a very small development task today, and I'm going to create my feature branch. So I click on my master branch and say, you know what, create new branch, and then I will give my branch a name. What I like to do is prefix it with feature or bug fix or something else / just to make sure that it in some way folds back into Azure DevOps if I have a lot of branches. That will be folding in some kind of folder structure. So based on, well, remote master, just to be sure, and data warehouse ticket number 1. There we go, create. Now I'm working in my feature branch, and what are we going to do? Well, we are going to add, well, let's say for today, we're adding product color number 2. And my development is done. Of course, Visual Studio or database SQL Server Data Tools or Git has identified my change on the view. I'm going to stage it, and I'm going to give it a meaningful commit message. So data warehouse ticket number 1, edit column for demo purposes. There we go. So commit stage and push to make sure that my branch is available at remote as well. If I'm, for example, might be absent or ill tomorrow. And now it is time to get the change into the development environment. Just to show you, if we go back to Azure DevOps and I hit refresh, nothing is running yet. So it seems to be that my pipelines are already doing what I expect them to do. This one didn't run yet. And my demo build pipeline, did run previously after I made the change in my pipeline itself. So They're not running yet, but let's give them a trigger. So my changes of my feature branch are already on the remote. We're going to check out the development branch, make sure we get the recent changes in, which should already be okay. There we go. And then we're going to merge our feature branch into the development branch. Merge into current branch, merge. And now I'm going to commit my merge commit to the remote. As soon as I do this, we will switch over to Azure DevOps and see what happens. So push. As soon as this says, well, it's pushed, there we go. We switch over and I'm going to hit refresh. Under queuing. So what you can see right now with both is this, they are currently in the queuing state. So if I hover over one, it says queued. So, and there we go. The first one actually just started. So what is it doing? It is currently executing my CI demo build pipeline. And it's starting to build the database project. While we are waiting over here, are there currently any questions?
Hello, everybody, and remember, enter your questions using the live chat. And we have covered already quite some parts here for the presentation. Right now, Olivier is going through the build deployment. So if you have questions about the deployment process, whether the overall process in itself or any particular stage, so this is your great opportunity right now.
Absolutely. So yeah, this is something, the build phase can take a while. We're currently actually creating the model file. What I would typically do if this is all executing, I'm just starting to do something else. So instead of losing my time by doing this myself on my local machine, I just let Azure DevOps handle the work. And in the meanwhile, I'm grabbing a coffee, I'm grabbing a snack, something else. I clean my desk, for example, or I just start another task I need to do. Cool. So our build task just completed, and it produces one artifact. If we now go back to our pipelines overview, we can see that the deploy pipeline is still queued, and there's a good reason for that one. The very first time you want to run this kind of pipeline, you will need to permit, you will need to give an explicit permit. So view and permit the pipeline to be executed. There we go. And now it will be queued and it will be executed later on. So this might take some time as well. So it says, well, it's not running yet, it's still queuing. And in a couple of seconds, it will start to process the deployment task as well. And this is taking some time, but we'll get there. I'm going to refresh for a moment. No, still queuing. Okay. This is something I wasn't expecting, to be fair. It should be running. Yeah, it's probably just as waiting. Yeah. Yeah, this is really playing the waiting game. So we need to wait until this job is being granted the position to start. Normally it should be going quite fast. For some reason it doesn't. So we're just going to wait for a couple more seconds before we're diving into something else. So we can still come back to this one later on. It's very strange, to be honest. I'm going to take a quick look at my build pipeline. It did say it published it, so I know the result is there, dev drop, yeah. And I can see my backpack file. So, okay, there we go. I just need to be patient. And that's one of the reasons I actually want to automate it. I don't want to be bothering when it gets deployed. I just want to start something completely different, which of course is pretty hard when doing a demo, but it can take some time. As you can see, it started right now. What I mentioned before, what we configured was checkout none. So what it's doing right here, it says, well, you know what? I'm just skipping the step due to condition evaluation. That's the checkout none command that we added. Then it's downloading the pipeline artifact, and in the end, it's now deploying to my development environment. What is exactly doing? Well, it's using SQL package, of course, and as you can see, it properly is making use of my variables. So it's connecting to that server name that I provided in a variable. It's connecting to my database that I provided, my username, and as you can see, my password is written, is masked as well. If you would use plain text, your password will be here in plain text, and this is something you want to be avoiding, just because as soon as somebody has access to your log files of Azure DevOps, they can find out what your password is. That's the reason why I like to use it as a secret. And as you see at the top, oh, there we go. So it started the deployment, and the deployment was done in 25 seconds, it says. That's strange, but okay. 25 seconds to deploy. And it completed successfully. This is how you can do, and I'm just going back to the overview, this is how you can create a separate build and deployment pipeline. This is one way to do it. Now, let's take a look at another way. So for this one, since we don't have that much time, I won't be creating it from scratch for today, but I will be showing you an alternative. So if we navigate back to new pipeline, and we just say, well, okay, we're going to use Azure Repos Git again. This is useful. Okay. Apparently, Azure DevOps is just a bit slower today. So, AdventureWorks LT. And if we scroll down, last two times we used starter pipeline. And for the next example, I'm just going to say, you know what? I already created it in the past. I'm going to reuse an existing Azure pipeline YAML file. So this is the one I'm going to use. So if we click on the existing Azure pipeline YAML file, we need to define in which branch it is and where it is located. In my case, it is my CI/CD one to rule them all pipeline. And we're continuing. There we go. And it's just loading up the existing YAML file. And we're just going to get through it. So I defined the name to the pipeline. I said, well, you know what? I only want this to get triggered if something changes if a change is made to master. And then in this one, I am defining stages as well. So first stage I will be defining is my build stage. And this actually is the same drill as we did before. Same steps, same kind of configuration. So we define the pool and the VM image, and then we define our jobs and steps. I'm going to zoom in slightly, that is a bit more easy to read. And if we scroll down, steps, well, we need to use MS Build. We're searching for SQL project files. We're going to use the copy files task to get it into certain repository or into a certain folder. And then we're using the publish pipeline artifact task to get it published as an artifact. As you can see, I did name my artifact slightly different, but that's just something that can be freely chosen, of course. Then, as a next stage, since my build stage was 1, I now want to have a stage that deploys to development. So I create my development stage, same drill, VM image Windows latest as my pool, then jobs, and here I'm just reusing the same steps I have been using in my previous deploy YAML file, which is, well, you know what, as a step, checkout none, download the pipeline artifact, then deploy SQL Azure Deckpack or use the task SQL Azure Deckpack deployment with the same configuration. What is important is if you use an existing YAML file, you will need to recreate the variables. So var server name is the first one I need to do. New variable is byte size data.database.windows.net. When I need to create var database name def. In this case, which is adventure works LT _dev. There we go. For the name, which is my name. And then the last one, well, not really, but for now, password, which will be a secret again. There we go. That's configured. I'm already going to add one more, since I know I will be using it anyway later on, which is for database name production, which will be adventure works LT. Okay, cool. We have defined all the variables. Now they will just work as they were already configured in the scripts. So this means after this one, we successfully have been publishing to development. At the next stage, I'm adding a stage to deploy to my production environment. But as mentioned before I deploy, I actually want to have that manual validation step in between. So in my production stage, the very first job I'm creating is a wait for approval job. And this is slightly different than everything else. Why? Well, this actually is a serverless job, meaning you don't need to define a pool. And to do that, you just need to use this kind of syntax, pool server, to define a serverless job. And what we're doing then is, well, we can just use the assistant to look for a manual validation task. Then we need to provide an email address, for example. There we go. And then the instruction. So here you can just write your instruction or your email that you would like to send out. And then on top of that, you need to define what it needs to do on timeout. Reject the change or resume the pipeline anyway. Whatever you would like to do with it. I already added it, of course. So what did I do? I just said, well, I want to notify this user, include this instruction, which is just a kind email or reminder to take action. I want to reject my change if it's not on time. And then I created a second job in that same stage, which is going to deploy to my production environment. So what is important here is, well, I really defined this. Depends on this job is only allowed to execute as soon as my wait for approval task has successfully completed. And then I actually use the same drill. So the same checkout none, same task to download the pipeline artifact, and as a final step, my SQL Azure Tag by deployment task. And that's it. Now, let's save this thing. There we go. Yep, it takes a while. If we go to pipelines, all, Adventure Works LT, one more time, rename, CI/CD, demo, run to rule, done all. There we go. This is ready. Now, before I'm going to execute it, or I'm going to make a change at least, I'm going to disable my other pipelines. Otherwise, there will be starting to get triggered. So demo deploy is something I'm going to disable by going to the three dots, say settings, and say disabled, save. And I'm going to do the same for my build pipeline over here, which I created for the previous demo. So in normal cases, you won't have any issue with this, of course. Disabled, save, and we're good to go. Now, to get the change in, if you recall, in the previous demo, I made a change. I added the column and deployed it into my development environment, which of course means that that change isn't yet on my production environment. Now, let's just use that branch, that featured branch, to get it into production by using a pull request. So repos, pull requests, new pull request, and right here we're going to say, you know what, feature DataAISF 1 into master. Yeah, add the column for demo purposes. Add the reviewer and create. I'm a big fan of pull requests, by the way. By starting to use pull requests a couple of years ago, I was able to downsize my bug fixes by more or less 50%. Since anyone that makes a change needs to be reviewed by somebody else, and yeah, peer reviewing is just very strong. It takes some time, but there are major benefits of it as well. So files, okay, a change was made on a view, and color 2 was been added. So I'm going to approve the change. I'm going to complete it. Complete. By doing this, if I have done everything right, if I now go to pipelines, my pipeline gets triggered. And as you can see, it is currently queued. And this, yet again, it started already. There we go. Is going to build the database project in stage number 1. And this is showing a very decent thing as a matter of graphics, of course. What I wanted to show. So it shows every single stage that my pipeline is going to execute. So the build stage, the development stage, and the production stage. Of course, we will be required to permit access once again, if I'm right. So we first need to play the waiting game. While this is moving, while this is running, are there any questions at this point in time?
Hi, Olivier. Let's check it out. So, folks, remember, if you have a question, use the live chat to enter your questions there.
Cool. So, in the meanwhile, I already permitted the pipeline to be executed as well for the development stage, and it is going through the development stage as we speak. So, it did skip the checkout, and it currently is downloading the pipeline and deploying to my development environment. I know I forgot to open up a tool. So Management Studio. Just that to show you that it is getting deployed. I'm opening up Management Studio, which I use all the time as well. So I'm connecting to my databases in my case, where I have my 2 example databases, of course. Over here, oh no, I didn't need tables, sorry. And views. If we quickly take this one from production, the view from production will not contain color 2 yet. In development, of course, it will. There we go, since we deployed it already earlier, and we're just redeploying the same change right now. So if we go back to Azure DevOps, this one, deployment is still busy. For some reason, it is taking time today, but there we go. It is updating the database, and it's done. And right now, what I want to show you is the approval step. So it is right now, as you can see at the left bottom corner, it is waiting on my approval. So if I go back to the overview, you can see right here, well, one manual validation needs your review before this run can continue. So let's review the task on the right, review. It's showing me, well, manual validation, waiting for approval. You know what? Give it a comment. It's okay for me for today. So, okie dokie. It is fine, resume. After I've done this, my second job to deploy to my production environment will start. So, manual validation step was completed after 36 seconds. And now it started my deploy to production. So let's just wait for hopefully less than a minute this time. But it is going to deploy to my production environment in the end. And this is how you can set up I will just call it my one to rule them all pipeline. I need to give kudos, by the way, for the manual validation step to Erin Dempster. This is something she learned me during SQL Saturday New York last year. That's the moment where I first came across the manual validation step. In the meanwhile, it is, of course, still executing the deployment. It will be there in a couple of seconds, and then we can get back to the slides. And there we go. So if we quickly validate in Management Studio right now, this is my development environment. It was already there. In my production environment, I just need to change my query. And as you can see right now, I have color 2 available as well. Deployment finished, development, production, and manual validation in between as well. Cool. this was everything I wanted to show you today during the demos. We're going back to the slides to have a brief recap. In the meanwhile, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask away in the chat. So if we go back to the slides, and I need to find out which one it is. Oh, it will be this one. There we go. So demo is what we've done. We tried to get some smoke out of my machine or Azure DevOps. Well, didn't work out, but we at least successfully were able to deploy and to automate our deployments. So we created a separate build and release pipeline. We created a one to rule them all pipeline as well. And of course, now it is time to get to the summary. And actually today we have been talking about quite some things. So at this point in time, before we talk about the moving forward section, we are used to work with database projects in one of the different tools, in one of the different flavors. We work with Azure DevOps repos. We work with Azure DevOps pipelines for deployment automation. We're using pull requests. We already improved our development cycle quite a lot. What would the next step be? And at this point in time, there's only one where I can think about. The next step to take it to another level would be automated unit testing. This can be done by using an open source T-SQL unit testing framework called T-SQL-T. It's completely open source and it just requires T-SQL knowledge. If you want to, you can use the unit testing framework in SQL Server Data Tools as well. If you want to use that one, just know, if I'm right, of course, you will need to require to know a bit of C# as well. Now, to finalize today's presentation, a brief overview of benefits and challenges as well. So, starting, and it's actually a bit of benefits and challenges just at the same point in time, but benefits first. Well, I'm actually, in the beginning, I was a bit doubtful about YAML since it was yet another language I need to learn. I just wanted to make sure I got my pipelines working. So I was a bit doubtful about it first. To be fair, at this point in time, I just love it. It just makes my life easier. I can manage my pipelines as code, which is a major benefit as well. But I still keep struggling with the strict ruling for indents. That's just me, sorry. But that is one of the challenges that I have with YAML all the time. Of course, other benefits about database deployment automation as well is it does save me time. In the past, after getting set up with database projects and Azure DevOps, I was already gaining a lot of time, but I was still required to spend more than an hour for every single deployment to all my 9 different environments. Right now, I can just start a deployment to all development environments, all acceptance environments, and all production environments in the end, with limited intervention required. Which, of course, makes sure that I save time where I can do something else. Start the next project, do some analysis, grab a coffee, grab lunch, whatever I would like to do. And then, of course, quite important as well, it makes sure that there is less room for mistakes. That being said, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Olivier Van Steenlandt. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here, of course. If you have any questions now, tomorrow, next week, just feel free to reach out. If you want to, by the way, everything I have been discussing today has been written out in blog posts as well, which are freely available on my website, where you can go through at your own pace with a lot more detail as well. Besides that, thank you.
All right, Olivier. Great presentation there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And folks, you still have a couple minutes. Got a question? Use the live chat. As Olivier said, once the streaming completes, use the comment section below to enter your questions, or you can reach out to Olivier here as he's showing his contact information. So really good presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And
Thank you, Olivier.
I actually didn't expect I was going to take 1 hour and 15 minutes. When I was preparing, I was just around the 1 hour mark. So actually, that's a lot longer. But it's
yeah,
pretty important as well. It's the very first time I'm delivering this one. So
all right. This is
yeah,
exciting. So you see, folks, you're hearing it here first.
yeah.
That's very exciting. We are honored to hear, man. Appreciate it. All right. Let me get one thing going over here. So, folks, this section here, what we're going to do, we are going to start. All right. So here we have a website. We're talking about here, the topic is we're going to be referring to books. And, I've shared the link to the website in advance. And thank you very much for everyone who took the time, fill out. And now it's about to find out who will be the winner. So a little shuffling. All right. So let's go so we're going to go for 2 books. And the books are the Deciphering Data Architectures by James Serra, which now it actually has been launched. So if you do not get to win, you can always go and check it out your favorite bookstore. And let me show you what does the book look like. All right. This is what the book looks like. Now, pricing is subject to change, as well as so Amazon. Sorry about that. Amazon, you have the book, Deciphering Data Architectures, choosing between modern data warehouse, data factory, data lakehouse, and data mesh by James Serra. So we'll be referring 2 of those here today. All right, let's get started. And who is the first? All right, Pablo. Congratulations. You are the first winner for today's book raffle. Let's remove you here. Give a chance to everybody else. Let's give it a fingers crossed, folks. And the winner for the Deciphering Data Architectures book is Jan. All right, yeah. So there we have it, folks. Thank you very much. We just ran our raffle here. One second. All right. We just ran our raffle here. See the winner, Pablo, and I believe it's pronounced Jan. So we'll be reaching out to you. And what I'm going to do is send you share your information with the author, and he will take care of it by following up with the publisher so you can get your book. So expect an email in the next 24 hours there. And for Olivier, just hang on a second. After we close it up over here, just stay on the line, Olivier. And for you folks at home, oops, thank you very much. And oops, we have a couple of feedback here. We have Ariwa, great presentation. Mr. Van Steenlandt, am I pronouncing correct? Olivier. I can't hear you, Olivier.
Oh, that's right. I already muted myself. No, yeah, thank you for the comment. I hope you learned something new today. So it was my pleasure for being here.
All right. And there we go. Olivier saying, it was my pleasure. Feel free to reach out. We also the Olivier's connecting. Also, thank you, Dipti, for hosting the event. I know at the end you have some problems, but definitely appreciate your support there with the user group today and I was there. And in March, our next presentation will also be actually the presenter will be Dipti. We will be posting out there for our next presentation, some very exciting topics. And every month, folks, we're going to have at least one presentation. So stay tuned. Remember to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you get notifications every time we start posting a video for a live chat that comes up. Now, without further ado, folks, as a closing, remember, enter your questions in the comment. You have Olivier's contact information if you have any questions. And thank you very much. Have a good day, you all. Bye-bye.